Okay, we are live.
We are.
Welcome to the show. I'm Caleb Johnston, over here to this direction.
Joel Furchess.
And right down here, we have the one and only
Clinton Wilcox.
Welcome to the show, gentlemen. Glad to have you here tonight.
Here.
Tonight we bring our listeners something very special and a little different. So this is kind of the sequel, continuance to kind of our music and movies discussion. We're taking this a different direction and taking a deep dive into a single film. So we have dubbed this Mentionables Apologetic Theater in honor of another very good show. We'll let you figure out which one that is. If you don't know it, I feel sorry for you already. So tonight we're going...
Is it Mentionable Apologetic Theater 3000, though?
Yeah, good point. I need to probably add that on next time.
You should put 1,000 of some sort.
Yeah. I was trying to think of something clever, but nothing's coming. We'll have it for next time, though. We'll have a clever number on there. Inside joke of some kind.
There you go.
So, the movie we are going to be diving into tonight is a sci-fi film from 2016 that came out. This movie got pretty decent coverage and reviews. Didn't play in theaters quite as long as a lot of films do, but it definitely made it to theaters and went over pretty well with critics as far as I remember with it. Personally, I think this is probably one of the best sci-fi films of the last decade, although it's not kind of the action-packed, excited movie that, you think of sometimes when you think of a sci-fi movie. This one's a lot deeper. So
Better than the latest Star Wars
movie? For me, yes.
I still haven't seen the latest Star Wars movie, actually.
Haven't you?
I haven't, no.
Lucky you.
Neither have I.
Yeah, the Last Jedi kind of killed any anticipation I had for the third one, or I guess episode 9 it would be.
Caleb's been talking up this movie. What do you think, Mr. Science Fiction fan?
Me?
No, the other science fiction fan.
Yeah, I think Arrival's a great film.
Okay. Had you seen it before this?
Yes. Yeah, I saw it when it came out into theaters in 2016. Now, I wasn't able to give it a watch, unfortunately, for our discussion here. But it's one of my... I'd rank it as one of my top 10, if not one of my top 5 science fiction films that I've seen.
Dang. Do you remember much about it?
I do. I've seen it. I've seen it twice because I have seen it once more since then. I recently bought a collection of like 10 sci-fi films. Most of them were kind of bad, but it came with Arrival on it, so I did get to rewatch it when I bought that collection.
Very nice.
In fact, let's see what. Oh, yeah, it's kind of buried away in some of my other DVDs. It came with like a couple of Jean-Claude Van Damme movies on it, and some some kind of cheesy films.
So you pop those in the VCR first, correct?
What's that?
You pop those in the VCR first, right?
Well, DVD player, but yeah, of course.
Well, in order for me to rewatch this film, I had to run down to Blockbuster and pick up a copy. So,
now I'm sad.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Do you guys hear there is one Blockbuster still open?
I have heard that. I don't know where it is, but I have heard that though.
It's like in Michigan or something.
Yeah, it's somewhere very, very obtuse.
Hmm.
I'd love to take my kids one day, though, like for vacation. Here's our trip. We're gonna go see a real relic.
Right.
Yeah, that would have been a classic road trip, back when I was a bachelor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was nothing like walking into a video store as a kid and just all the covers of movies and games and everything. It was fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I'm not sure if I should talk about some of the films I've seen from Blockbuster. I remember I went down to Blockbuster and they had just some of like the corniest movies. Like if there's some kind of bug or some kind of creepy crawly, somebody has made a giant movie about it. And so I saw
like about a centipede, only human.
well, no, just like a giant centipede, like giant centipedes ravaging a town, or giant spiders, or giant.
That actually sounds like a better movie.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So, like, I've seen a lot of just cheesy, giant monster movies about giant bugs. Just like going down to Blockbuster and checking them out.
So, is that part of your like fetish for giant monster movies?
Well, I mean, not specifically, because I like good movies. I was just checking them out out of like morbid curiosity. These were like low budget films, and so it was just kind of a kind of something that I was just kind of curious about. But I do enjoy good monster movies. Like Pacific Rim is one of my favorites.
I just saw Atlantic Rim recently.
Oh, that's one of those asylum films.
Well, yeah, I do want to say something real quick.
Sure.
Big congratulations to Joel Furchess, as he is just the first person to ever bring up the human centipede in a apologetics podcast. So congratulations, Joel. You will probably hold that title for a long time.
Oh, is there really a human centipede movie?
Yeah.
Really? Oh, geez.
Okay. I mean, I've seen The Fly, so I've seen a movie about like a human fly. With
this
Jeff
is worse.
But
it's not.
Yeah,
it's not what
you think. Conversation best left for off air.
All right.
Ooh. We'll have we'll have to show Clinton the trailer for this movie in private and just watch his face.
Oh, okay.
We'll maybe make that a special feature for patrons.
There you go. Wow. Oh.
Speaking of which, if you're not signed up as a patron, please feel free to head over to Patreon and check out the Mentionables over there.
Or if you go to the Mentionables page at thementionables.org and click on the first button you see, that'll take you there.
Well, there you go. And while you're clicking buttons, go ahead and hit subscribe to this channel and the little bell for notifications so that you'll be notified when we go live like this. We enjoy listener interaction, so would love to have you hop on, join us for a live stream, give us some comments to interact with.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, with that, Joe, we hadn't heard your kind of overall take on this movie yet. We won't get into any spoilers yet, but any initial feelings or thoughts about this film?
Yeah, so the film reminded me of something else. And now that you've asked me that question, it'll come to me later. I like the I like the premise of the film. If you haven't seen the film, there's the main character in the film. But she's a weird kind of linguist. She's like a psycholinguist or a lingual historyist or something like that. When it showed the initial, when she's first introduced in the film, prior to all the flashbacks or flash forward. At any rate, she's teaching her class in college, and it's a classic lecture hall. Her whole introduction is, why is Portuguese different than the other romantic languages? Well, it all started a long time ago, and this, and she begins, and then somebody walks in and interrupts her, and that's the end of that. And I was like, dang it, I wanted to hear the Portuguese story. It was the most interesting part of the film to me.
I know there's a few moments in this movie where they just kind of leave you with not knowing what feels to be, an interesting plot element.
Was the original premise for the movie made by Michael Crichton? Because it seemed very Michael Crichton-esque.
Actually, it was originally based on a short story called The Story of Your Life by Ted Chiang.
Mm-hmm.
This was a short story. It's like 15 pages. I actually found it once I saw the trailer for this movie. I went ahead and I'm like, wonder what that's based on. Looked it up and read the short story, which is slightly different, of course, but it still has kind of the profound elements to it, and definitely worth reading for people if they haven't.
Okay.
One of the greatest thing about this movie was that they used the canary in the cage motif for checking atmosphere. It was like, NASA has instruments for that.
You think, at least.
No, they do. They actually exist. But the canary added an element to it. So,
and with this movie, there wasn't much I found that wasn't significant in some way.
Yeah.
You have those movies where it's clear that certain elements are haphazardly thrown in. This is one of those movies, every time I've went back and watched it again, it's like, you know what? Every line in this movie is meticulously planned out. So I wonder what some of the significance of the canary may be, aside from some of the, obvious plot elements with it. But yeah. I wonder if there's not more significance to that in some way as well.
So she's aliens in this movie. Spoiler.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and throw our spoiler warning up. So listeners, if you have not seen this movie, we do recommend from this point on, you pause the video, go rent this movie, watch it first, and then come back for the discussion, because the movie's going to be kind of destroyed for you if unless you like movies spoiled in advance, so you don't have any surprises.
Yeah, so remember, go rent the movie. The last Blockbusters is in Michigan, so might be a long pause.
A little bit. Although I tend to use, I've been using a streaming service now called Vudu, VUDU, for watching movies, for renting movies, essentially.
This episode of The Mentionables brought to you by Vudu, the internet rental site, not the practice.
I'm surprised we haven't talked about that on the podcast yet.
Actually, by the way, correction. We need to make a correction. The last Blockbuster is in Bend, Oregon.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I was actually in Bend, Oregon a couple of years ago on the way to Spokane, Washington.
Well, next time you're there.
Yeah, next time I'm there, I could stop by the last remaining Blockbuster.
And now you know. And
knowing is half the battle. Sorry, stole your thunder there.
Perfect. No, that's perfect.
Well, let me walk very briefly up to the point that I'm referencing here. So, Arrival, as you might suspect, is a movie about things arriving. In this case, weird ships. And so whenever there's a weird ship, you have to make first contact. And that's always the question, how do you do that? Linguist in, because, you got to talk to the whatever happened to arrive. And so at some point, she's in the place talking to the things, and they don't speak English, unlike every alien in every other sci-fi movie ever.
Mm-hmm.
I always just thought aliens spoke English. It's weird to me.
Well, Star Trek gets around that with their universal translator.
Yeah. But anyway, she's there, and trying audibly to speak, and then she pulls out a whiteboard and like starts writing words on it. It was like, no, that's no better. That might in fact be worse. Because that's code for sounds. Each of those symbols is a code for sounds, unless you're using more like an Eastern language where like the whole symbol is a word. But yeah, no, I'm seeing that, and unfortunately, because I'm getting my degree in behavior analytics, I was like around that at all. First, you got to figure out the function of the behavior, and then you got to go through a series of reinforcements in order to encourage a. Anyway, language.
Yeah, I was going to say something, but we're just going back forth, brain wiping each other tonight. So
that is the correct answer. Yes.
Yeah. So
while you're thinking of that, there is a Michael Crichton book, and the premise is that I don't know, the military or somebody created these sort of nano butts that are light enough to blow around like dust, and so they can propel themselves in the air currents, and so they do that, and so they look like dust clouds flying around, and they get free and they start working as a hive unit, so they can achieve some semblance of a tell together. And so they bring a linguist in. And, no, actually, I think she's like a child therapist or something, but she does that. She's like out in the desert with flashcards, like trying to teach these dust clouds how to make words. Or that's what reminded me of this.
Wow. That's interesting. That'd make an interesting movie plot too.
Actually, a better book than you'd think. It's interesting, like most Michael Crichton things.
Right.
Yeah, he's the one who wrote Jurassic Park, right?
Yep. And Congo, and
Congo,
everything else.
Yeah, he did a lot of good stuff.
Yeah, he was kind of like the Johnny Depp of authors because he could assume any form that he chose.
Mm-hmm.
So, with this movie, to kind of, I guess, add to that and kind of my 2 cents as we kind of dive down into some of these themes, is you've kind of got a couple of plot elements going on here. So you have this overarching story of the aliens arriving, and then you have these flashbacks that are occurring, showing kind of your introduction to this main character, Louise. So, and both of these elements get more intertwined as you kind of go through the movie. But throughout this and throughout, as Joe was describing, them going in and trying to make contact with the aliens, I think I may actually be able to pull up a clip of that. Should we use movie clips in this show, or
go for it?
Why not? All right.
I had assumed you were going to.
All right. Perfect. Let me throw this up real quick. So this will actually be the clip where they first are go in to see the aliens. So it'll be that scene that you were actually just describing for us. So, and of course, the canary we were talking about earlier, they of course bring in with them for this scene as well. So you kind of get that vibe of people going into a mine with this, not knowing what to expect. So let's see if this shares. I'm going to stop it right there. Again, if you haven't seen the movie, you go see it if you want to find it. We just showed the most suspenseful scene in the whole movie. So
Yeah,
I
I
get
really.
a Cthulhu vibe off of those things when they first came in.
oh yeah.
I did.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I really appreciated that the movie was willing to take its time and not rush through the scene, really build up the suspense as you're waiting for the creatures to first appear.
You know, as they came up to I got a flashback to Independence Day. Especially
Yeah.
like the one time that the thing like hit the glass.
Yeah. That's true. It
Yeah,
definitely took some cues from that.
Yeah, I can see that. I was kind of getting a Close Encounters of the Third Kind vibe a little bit because of the kind of the eerie music being played. You know, like the when the I don't know if you've seen that movie, but when the humans were trying to make contact and they had that, you know, all the lights that lit up with the musical tones.
Do 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 do.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
5 notes.
Yeah. Been a while since I've seen that one, but yeah, I was kind of getting vibes of Close Encounters there.
You know, when I translate this into the podcast episode, I've got to figure out what to do about that section where they heard a bird tweeting and eerie music, and that's it.
Yeah, just leave it. We'll let them figure that out.
There you go.
So
Yeah, actually, my first time seeing it, I actually didn't pick up on the canary thing. I wasn't actually sure why they were using the canary, but I guess I've seen too many science fiction shows, like you were saying. NASA should have instruments that measure the atmosphere. So I didn't really pick up on the canary the first time I saw it.
Yeah, I get that it was like atmospheric and symbolic and so forth. So, you know, I mean, it was a good plot device or even just scenery for the movie. So
Yeah.
it was effective. Part of me, which is analytical, was like, nah.
You know, another thing about that scene that we just watched too that I noticed on my most recent viewing is it's interesting how every element of kind of the plot or what's happening is so character driven versus alien kind of driven as it is in a lot of other sci-fi films. Like the whole shot of them coming in upside down, you know, is really representative of what's happening in the main character's world at that time. I mean, her world is being turned upside down, as it would for anybody. But, you know, it's really interesting, even in the first few scenes of the movie where chaos is starting to unfold as these things show up. It's very realistic in terms of, you know, what we've seen kind of recently within the world. It's what you'd kind of expect people to do if something like this happened. So I think it really sucks you into this character story versus kind of the overall sci-fi creepy elements, you know.
So, yeah, do you remember the part of the movie where like they're playing the news feeds and people are flipping out and rioting and, you know, breaking stuff and, you know, blaming the president and things like that? I was like, ooh, this is a little like.
What was that last? You cut out a little bit. What was that last word? A little.
I was saying as I'm watching the scene, I was like, oh, this is uncomfortable.
Yeah.
This is awkward.
Yeah, it really was, especially, you know. Yeah, exactly. Something interesting too that I picked up on it this most recent viewing was one of those clips was very Heaven's Gate-ish in terms of it mentioned, you know, this cult where a bunch of people had went ahead and committed suicide fearing the end of the world and stuff.
No. What they did was they combined the Heaven's Gate cult and the the one in Waco.
Yeah, the Branch Davidians.
Yes, the Branch Davidians. So they combined those two things because they said that they committed suicide because the coming of the aliens was the fulfillment of a prophecy that would take them to heaven. So Heaven's Gate, and then Pound, which was Branch Davidian.
Yep. So I thought that was interesting too. Like lots of elements to kind of make it close to home. The other thing though, with that whole cult clip on the TV, and then so eventually, as they're going through this process of trying to learn the language and how to communicate with these things, and they're communicating all around the world. So there's 12 of these ships all over the planet that they're communicating with. And you could dive into the significance. There's 2 aliens in each pod, so 24.
There's
What's
only
the
12.
significance of
There was
that?
only 2.
There were only 12 ships. There were only 2 aliens on each one. So
I'd always assumed there were just a bunch of them standing in the background.
yeah, I think they said there were 12, if I recall
correctly. I had always assumed there were like a bunch of aliens standing in the fog behind the glass.
I mean, I guess there could be.
Yeah, that was kind of the impression that I got too.
But, well, maybe I'm way off base then.
So shoot, what did they call them though? The something pods.
The heptapods.
Heptapods. Do you know how much a hepto is?
7.
Yeah, 7. So we got the number 12. We got 24. If they could fit 40 in there somewhere, then that would complete the numerology, I think.
Yeah, that's true. And, it's interesting. You've got the 7, 12, 24. I think most of the numerology in this movie all points back to some element of time. So, you've got 12 hours in a time cycle from AM to PM, 24 hours in a day, 7 days in a week.
All right. Yeah,
12 months a year.
Hear you. In that case, then it shouldn't be 40, it should be 30.
Yeah.
And then 365.
Right. Exactly. I may have to go back and watch again to see if those are mentioned anywhere, because I have a hard time thinking that it wasn't significant.
Yeah, so I suppose one of the biggest spoilers that, the only way we can discuss the flow and meaning of the film, is let everybody know that there was some kind of time element going on. That was what it reminded me of. Okay. So to finish my sentence, there was the playing with time. Events were not sequential necessarily, and it's explained in the film. I won't kill that right this moment. But no, the thing that came to mind for me was, have either of you ever read Slaughterhouse-Five?
I'm familiar with it, but I haven't read it.
What's that?
I haven't read it.
You haven't read it. Kurt Vonnegut. Are you familiar with Kurt Vonnegut?
Yeah, I'm familiar with it, but I haven't read it.
All right. So at any rate, the film, no, not the film, the book. The book Slaughterhouse-Five, essentially the feature of the, Slaughterhouse-Five refers to a kind of a prison camp in World War II or something like that. The whole book is this one guy being captured by aliens, and the aliens don't view time linearly. And so he's kind of brought into that world. And so as a result, the book just jumps all over the place. And, he's experiencing various instances of moments of his life, sometimes simultaneously at 2 completely different periods of life. And keeps reference. The reason that it's called Slaughterhouse-Five is he was a prisoner of war, and that was where he was kept. And so, that features strongly in this whole, his life jumping all over the place. That was kind of the central hub that it flipped around. But, he's talking about how human beings have to be so organized and linear, and that's just an illusion in our mind. And I'm reading the book, I was like, no, that's legit. Reason needs to be present in order to, think and even have this conversation. So, and in order for reason, things have to have sequence. Right, Clinton?
Yeah. At its heart, Arrival is really a movie about the philosophy of language. And Arrival. The reason Arrival is such a great sci-fi show, and it's very difficult to get a movie like this made, because so many people are so impatient now and need like the action movie elements. And so
get to the point.
Right. And so it's really difficult for filmmakers to get a movie like this made because, there's no real action in it. It's just all about the underlying message of the film, but it's told in a way that's intelligent and it takes its time. And so it's really just a movie about the philosophy of language. And so what makes Arrival such a great science fiction film, there's nothing wrong with the sci-fi action film, like, Star Trek 2009 is not a Star Trek film, but it was a decent sci-fi action film.
Yeah, but Star Trek: The Motion Picture was very
Star Trek
much
the
like
Motion
this
Picture,
film.
yes, and I am a Star Trek the Motion Picture apologist. I think it was a good film, but again, it's a very slow moving film. It takes its time. It's asking philosophical questions, that kind of thing. And so, what makes Arrival such a great sci-fi film is because it's not about the science fiction. What makes it such a great film is it's using the science fiction element of aliens from outer space coming down, and we have to learn how to communicate with them. It's just using that as a backdrop to tell, to basically investigate the philosophy of language. Now, it is based upon a discredited view of language. I don't remember exactly what it's called or who the main proponents of it are, but yeah, the philosophical ideas that it tries to investigate in this film, are not true. But I really appreciate that, number one, it's a true science fiction film in the in the best sense of the word. It's one of the better science fiction films to come out in a long time. And number two, it wasn't about one of the cheesy messages that Hollywood usually beats us over the head with, like messages about friendship or messages about family or messages about destiny, those kinds of things. It actually the overall plot of the film investigated something that we don't really get a whole lot. So I really appreciated that it was different than a lot of the Hollywood movies that we get.
Yeah, I agree, and I think the way that it did that so carefully, and it brought in enough questions and thought-proposing statements, that it really did a good job doing so. And we'll get into this a little bit later, but for me, the big question that this film really pushed you to consider was actually the problem of suffering, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's a big.
There was that element, yeah.
Yeah, I guess we've already started with the spoilers, right? So I guess we can just go.
We're well past the spoilers.
We're knee deep.
Yeah. Okay. So you can fill in the blanks if I'm forgetting something here, because I've seen the movie twice and it's been a little while since I saw it last time. So one of the main plot elements is what was the lead's name?
Louise.
Louise. Yeah, played by Amy Adams, who I thought did a fabulous job in this film. Mm-hmm. I only know her as Lois Lane from, I think it was Superman Returns.
Me? So Amy Adams is in everything.
Okay, because I'm not very
she's
familiar
with. She's a delight at everything she's in.
She well, okay. I've never. I guess I just haven't, because I don't see very many movies. So I guess I just haven't really seen anything with Amy Adams except for Superman Returns. But yeah. So she did a great job, and yeah. So the movie really revolves around her, and the other guy that they bring in, played by Hawkeye. Hawkeye from the Avengers films, who I can never remember his name, but I know him a lot better than I know Amy Adams. I
knew it until you said that.
Yeah. So essentially, and so there is kind of a time travel-ish element there. Not that anyone travels through time, but Amy Adams catches these glimpses of not just flashbacks but flash forwards. And so there are some things that don't make very very much sense. For example, how did because Amy Adams had to call the Chinese president or something, and got his phone number because she flashed forward to meeting him in the future, but she shouldn't have been able to meet him unless she called him, and she wouldn't be able to call him unless she met him. So it was a kind of a paradox that shouldn't have gotten started. So that was kind of nonsensical. But the main focus of the film is that Louise and the guy that she's partnered with, who are trying to decipher the language of the aliens and learn how to talk with them. Is that the two of them eventually end up getting married, having a kid, and while she's pregnant with the kid, the doctor gives them a terminal diagnosis. And from what I got of the film, Clint Barton, which is not his name in the film.
Jeremy Renner.
Played by Jeremy Renner. Thank you. Whatever his name is in the film.
That's why you like him.
Yeah, he I think he actually wanted her to terminate the pregnancy, but she wanted to keep the child because she believed that even though the child had a terminal illness, the amount of time that they would have had together was worth the pain of eventually losing the child and having to continue to grow without her. And so Jeremy Renner's character ends up leaving Louise when she decides to keep the child, but she never regrets keeping the child at all. And so there's actually kind of a pro-life element to the film as well. Which in a lot of I'm in the pro-life movement, a lot of pro-life people kind of picked up on that element of it too. And
and I felt like there might have been that element in it.
And you're very close. The only difference there is it was actually, when the girl was around 8 or 9, is when she actually tells him what was going to happen. So, and he thinks she made the wrong decision. So whether that's a reference to, getting with him at all, or whether it's a reference to the pregnancy is kind of ambiguous.
Okay, yeah, and so that, because like I said, it's been a little while, and so I always thought that was kind of ambiguous because I wasn't 100% sure if they were actually talking about having an abortion or just having the relationship in the first place. And so I wrote an article about that and saying I really don't want to jump on the bandwagon of claiming there's a pro-life element to the film here because I don't know what the leanings are in that respect of the writers or the director or anything like that. And so it can kind of appear that to us, but we might be trying to look for it and be seeing it where it's not actually present because we're we want to see it so much. So I kind of kind of backed off a little bit from trying to really say that there are any pro-life themes in the film. I mean, there's
but it still had that flavor to it.
Or it could have been, yeah. And I mean, there's still a very definitely a very positive message that she wanted to still continue to keep the child and go through the pain of losing the child because of all the time that they were able to spend together, even though it was diminished. And so it definitely still had a very, very positive pro-life message in that respect, even if not specifically about the abortion issue itself.
Now, I had been under the impression that the girl was going to die because she could see the future. It wasn't that the doctor had given the diagnosis. She just told the guy that, hey, in the future, she's not going to make it.
Okay.
That had been my impression. I didn't get that the doctor had told her that. I just assumed she knew.
No. Okay. That's what I was trying to say. You were right. She knew. And this was well before she actually got the diagnosis of anything.
Okay, that actually sounds right. So I think you guys are probably right about that. So and so like I said, after I'd just seen the movie, I would have remembered a lot more about it. But that sounds right.
She said that I told your daddy something he wasn't ready to hear yet, and the fact of the matter is she didn't have to tell him that we're going to have a kid and the kid's going to die. She could have let that play out as it naturally would have if she didn't see the future.
Yeah,
but she saw the future. She made the decision to let him know what the future was, and that plays with this theme you see in science fiction movies a lot. That you shouldn't know the future. It's not natural for you to know what's coming.
Right.
And I agree with that. I really don't know. I really don't want to know what's in the future.
Yeah, as far as I know, though, Louise, I don't think had a choice about whether or not to see the future.
No, she didn't. She had a choice about whether to husband, though.
Yeah. I mean, I can imagine though that I don't know. Maybe she felt like it was kind of a big thing to keep from him. Like maybe she needed someone else to go through it with her or something. So maybe that's why she told him. Or I don't think it was actually very specific about why, but
Well, the thing that I don't know if the writers really played with this idea, but the fact of the matter is that, in a sense, she would have to make all of instantly, because everything that's ever going to happen to her is available to her right now.
Mm.
She has that information available to her at any given time, and all of the decisions she makes with, with the knowledge of everything that she's going to do.
Mm.
So either you have to go with the fatalist thing that now suddenly she has no choices because she knows everything that's going to happen,
right.
or you could go with the more libertarian idea that she makes choices. She just has to make all her choices simultaneously.
That's a good point. Yeah, and for me, I think those kind of elements of the plot, specifically that plot point, are really, and it does kind of boil down to one choice in a sense, in that, when she finally goes back in for the final time to see these beings, it kind of does indicate that this choice is the one that kind of changes all that around. And from there, things are pretty dictated out. But it's interesting how it does parallel currently. So the choices being made presently impact the past and vice versa.
Yeah, so we should probably mention, because I think this is significant, that her eventual husband, her male counterpart for the encounter, was a mathematician. So she was a linguist, and he was a mathematician, and there's that play back and forth. But I'm reminded of when the first teaching job I ever got. I showed up the first day of the school year hallway, and the art teacher and the math teacher in the hallway arguing about whether art or math is the language of the universe. And
right.
That was an amusing thing. I think that was a very rehearsed argument between the two of them. But that comes into play a little bit in this film, because there's that interplay between mathematics and language, and yet those two things exist on different planes.
Yeah, I think math being the language of the universe is kind of a recurrent theme among science fiction. I remember the movie Contact. They discovered that there was alien life because the aliens were like broadcasting the prime numbers, and they discovered the broadcast. So I think that's kind of a recurring theme among science fiction films and stories.
Yeah, and it was definitely big here. Go ahead.
Yeah, it was a very satisfying alien encounter film, and that's difficult to do, because the whole idea behind an alien encounter is the alien part. It's alien, it's unexpected, it's unknown. There's that unknown element, and as soon as like the doors of the spaceship open and they walk out, that element is sort of destroyed. But they managed to kind of keep that element of mystery throughout, so that you get a very satisfying alien encounter. So I really appreciated that about the film.
Yeah,
and for me, it went a little beyond even the alien encounter. What I think another one of these kind of underlying big themes is not just a alien encounter, but an encounter with something that transcends the universe that we're used to. There's just this constant sense of transcending beyond particularly time in a way that I think's really thought-provoking. And for me personally, when I first saw this and I first read the short story, I hadn't encountered thinking about time in quite the way it was portrayed here. And it opened up a lot of new avenues for philosophical exploration of that subject for me. First time I saw this and kind of went into it, because that just feeling of transcending beyond your entire world, everything you're familiar with, is just kind of this massive, overwhelming sense throughout the film.
So I recently had to turn in my final project for the semester for the courses that I'm taking. And of course, I'm taking behavioral analysis. In behavioral analysis, language is broken down to a behavior. So it's kind of a process. And so as a result, you have to, it's very complex in terms of behavior because you have to think that there's something that triggers the behavior, and then the consequence of that behavior. And language is so complicated that it's very difficult to explain it in the same way that you might Pavlov's dogs. And so when you get into that stuff, you can get yourself a big headache when you start to read the academic material about language as a behavior. Now, another part of behavior analysis is we only deal with the things you can see. So, you can't see whatever's going on in somebody's head. And as a result, you can't make speculations or come to conclusions about thought or feelings, except what's side. So the project that I had was to answer the question, could private verbal behavior explain the concept of thought? All right. So, to break that down to more reasonable language, basically, it's asking the way in which we use language, the way in which we talk, if we behavior, would that explain thinking? Is language and verbal behavior the way that my mind works when I think? And if it is, we can use the verbal behavior we see that we can observe to explain thinking, because whatever our mouth is doing out loud, we're also doing in our head when we think. And therefore, we can't really think as such until we pick up the behavior, the verbal behavior, language. Now, I say all of that to say this. The movie's about language. And the movie's also about understanding time in sort of this, non-linear sense that you can see past, present, and future. If language determines how we think, then language determines how we remember. Everything that goes on in our head is lingual to some extent. And so when, the idea in this movie is there's this universal language, and that once you have access to it, you have access to every. And so, if you use this idea of language as the means by which we think, a universal language would allow us to think universally.
That's insightful. I appreciate you bringing that to the table, because I hadn't quite considered it in that sense.
Well, yeah. I had to. I'd just written that.
And the movie does point to that at a couple spots. I think one of the quotes I had written down here was actually along those lines. The quote was, "Language is the glue that holds society together." And of course, they parallel that between, well, is it this or is it science? But it's interesting. It holds that, and then it takes that a step further too, and it talks about purpose, I think, in life. And again, this goes back to how positive the kind of message of the movie is there was a scene that I didn't respect as much until seeing it again, where Louise writes on a whiteboard that's covered with math equations all over the place. And she just wrote in the middle, what is your purpose on Earth? Which, while it's a question they're trying to find out from the aliens, I think it's also a very clear distinction between, you can have all this math and science behind things, but, there's this transcendent kind of question of what is purpose that science can't answer.
Yeah, if you're trying to get aliens to understand you, I would not have led with that question.
Yeah, I know, right?
I bet this is Dr. William Lane Craig's favorite movie, dealing with how they dealt with time.
Probably so. I don't know. I don't know whose it wouldn't be. I love this flick.
Well, I guess it depends on what you mean by dealing with time, because I enjoy time travel stories. Back to the Future, of course, being a classic example. Star Trek 4 being another, and Star Trek First Contact. So yeah, so time travel adventures, a lot of stories I like, but this one definitely had a unique spin on it.
Yeah.
The one thing I was disappointed that they left out of the movie compared to the original story was the original story talked some about Fermat's principle of least time, which deals with, from the scientific side, it's kind of the parallel to the whole language story. And it deals with how light travels through water. And essentially, it's always going to minimize or maximize its path. I'm not nearly educated enough to explain it in great detail, but it is still a principle that gives that same idea that in order to minimize or maximize the amount of time it takes light to get from point A to point B versus point C, it has to almost know the destination to begin with. So it again kind of is a scientific representation of kind of the same idea that's portrayed with language in the movie. So, and I'm sure they cut that because, like, this is going to make this go even further over people's heads, since we're already in deep with, dealing with time as much as we are.
Right.
I like it earlier in the movie when they grab the linguist, for the first time, and they're like, "Yeah, could you translate this?" And they like play a like song. I'm like, "Okay, what were they saying?" I never really got whether the sounds they were making were significant in terms of being a form of communication, or if their only form of communication was sort of the ink writing that they did in the air.
Yeah, I didn't get anything from that either. I'm not sure.
I think it was intended to be that, yes, they were able to communicate or vocally, but they did the ink writing partially because she did the writing. She came up, and after trying to talk to them, she showed them a whiteboard and started writing words on it, and they did the same thing. After making noises, she started showing writing. They started showing writing.
Yeah, and I kept listening. One thing I was kind of hoping to hear in the sounds was, I was curious as to whether they sounded the same backwards or forwards. So, I'd love to sit down and rewind clips and just see, because, if they're being consistent in the movie, that would have been a really cool way to do it. But in the listening that I did, I couldn't kind of do that, at least verbally, and hear whether or not that was the case.
Yeah.
Trying to see if there's any backmasking on the language.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, with the detail they went into on other things, it's certainly a possibility.
Played that whale song alien language backwards, it would be actual whale song.
It's possible too.
Yeah.
A couple other things too, or one of the other elements, we'll probably come back to time again here in a minute, but I thought it was interesting parallel as well between the elements of hope, even in the face of suffering, compared to the reactionary fear. So we mentioned the cult clip on TV earlier. So very early on, you're seeing this fear develop in the public. And then you have one of these soldiers who's at the encampment around this thing, who you see him getting fearful in conversation with his wife on the phone, and they're getting more scared, ramping each other up with fear. And it continues to develop as they kind of hear this stuff. And eventually they think they found that alien's word for weapon. And that really freaks the guy out. So he sneaks in and plants a bunch of C4 in the spaceship.
like you do.
Right.
Right.
So I thought it was interesting too that you have these elements of fear that are kind of shown. There are some people who have this fear, which in this case, it's as Lovecraft states, it's the fear of the unknown. And yet you also have this bittersweet hope when things are known.
You ever notice that in alien movies, they either come to like take over and destroy and rob us of our resources and eat us and so forth, or they come because of light, peace, joy, love,
Yeah.
humanity? This one could have gone either way.
They never just come for like a visit and to just hang out for a while.
Yeah, seriously.
Wait, were the Coneheads aliens?
Well,
I think they were, right?
Well, what about E.T.?
Well, yeah, he did just come to hang out. Good point.
No, E.T. got left behind. He was stranded on Earth. He spent the whole time building a telephone out of a speak and spell.
Right, no, because it's been a long time since I've seen E.T. Like, I don't think I've seen it since I was a kid. But what was that alien race here to do? Because I remember that E.T. got left behind. That's why he wanted to phone home. But what was that alien race here to do?
It looked like they were collecting samples. They came down. They were wandering around in field, touching things, and then they left.
Okay.
So,
yeah, they were researching things to take back to the Galactic Empire.
Okay, so that would still be kind of a different thing, that they weren't here for peace talks or to invade us. They were just here to collect samples of our dirt or whatever.
Was E.T. a Jedi? Is that why he had left the bike?
Oh, that's a good point. I mean, there is that connection to Star Wars.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
All right.
That's oh boy, that's a whole nother road to go down.
That's a
It
thinker.
would explain a lot from that movie, like how he mind melded with the
Yeah. Or how he was able to heal with his finger.
Yeah.
Ouch. Yeah. Which apparently now Jedis are like Jesus because they can bring back to life and they can heal now.
Sure. Why not?
Well, now I'm never going to be able to watch E.T. the same way anymore.
Right.
So, what about for you guys? Did you see the gospel portrayed anywhere in this movie?
Not really, but I try not to look for the gospel in Hollywood films.
That would be a little disappointing, honestly.
Yeah, so for me, and I try and look for these things because I think they're good ways to represent them when talking with people, or if it proves just one element of a point you're trying to explain, it can be a good connection. So for me, the one place where I kind of saw the gospel in a certain way within this movie is you have this moment where the C4 is planted in the area where they all communicate with these aliens. There's some kind of glass barrier of some kind there between the aliens and the humans.
Glass,
plasma.
so
I know, right? But there's this barrier there, and you have this soldier who plants the C4 and blows it up. But as it's getting ready to blow up, one of the aliens, nicknamed Abbott, he
Oh yeah, I forgot they had nicknames.
Yeah, Abbott and Costello.
Right.
So he uses whatever ability he has to push them back and essentially change the gravity on the ship so that they fall out and away from things. And in doing so, he essentially saves their lives. But you find out later when she goes back up and is able to talk to them again that he's actually in the dying process. So, and I think it becomes even more significant when you realize that they knew beforehand what the cost of coming to Earth and passing on this message would be. They knew the cost was going to be this one's life. He knew it himself, that it would be the cost that would have to be paid for coming to Earth. And of course, their overall purpose is, eventually they're going to need something from humanity, which, whatever it is, we'll find out in the sequel. But
I hope they don't do a
Years from
sequel.
now.
This worked as
I hope
a
not
standalone
to.
film.
But the question, Caleb, is did he have a choice? You're acting like it was a sacrifice, but he knew that was coming. And they came because, humanity was going to help them, except if humanity didn't have this secret, in which case humanity wasn't going to help them. But that, circles back to the fatalism thing,
Yeah.
He knew that he was going to die. They knew that the C4 was going to be planted because they could see the past and future. But they also saw themselves coming to Earth and dying and so on and so forth. So, thereby the fatalism question.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think with her, they dodged the question because it appeared that she was able to make choices prior to learning the language, which they wouldn't have had the option considering that they always knew it. After learning the language, she had this, moment where she saw everything that was going to happen. And like I said, you could make the argument she made all choices simultaneously at that point.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're born, well, I don't know. I don't know how they develop in that society. Maybe they got to get around.
No, I mean, that's a good point. That's another deep dive there to even begin to cross that line. But yeah, I mean, it is a plot hole, but I still find it interesting that we can see this representation there.
Please do not tell me you compared Jesus to an alien.
I did just a little bit. Like I said, it's a parallel. It's not a perfect comparison by any means. Just a parallel for an element. But I mean, most great stories have the gospel in some way, shape, or form, whether it's directly referenced or whether it's referenced just as this hero narrative, but it usually involves sacrifice of some kind on the part of the hero. So, most great stories have kind of this element that points back to, what we see in the greatest story.
Was that a C.S. Lewis, Ian kind of thought there?
Yeah. Along those lines.
The true myth.
Mm-hmm. Precisely.
All right. So how could we use this for apologetics purposes? Well, Dr. William Lane Craig wouldn't point toward B theory of time, which states that all time exists simultaneously, like the cells of a film reel superimposed upon each other. And so that would be what would allow you to see the past and future, because past and future exist instead of being actualized in the present.
And if that's the case, then we really don't have a free will.
Don't we, though?
Well, I think we do, and that's why I'm skeptical of the B theory of time. But B theory of time is all past, present, and future are all simultaneously real. And so what will happen will happen. What has happened has happened. So it seems like under B theory of time, free will is an illusion.
Well, let me ask you this, Clinton. Under B theory of time, did the universe begin to exist?
Well, William Lane Craig would say no. I'm not an expert on B theory of time. I don't know much about physics. So, yeah, I don't know, because I'm not, not very well versed in physics.
Well, allow me to make a argument for you. What if B theory of time, all moments in time exist simultaneously, but what if time came into being prior to those moments existing? So that there was a cause for the film reel, if you will, for all of those cells to come into place. In which case, you could argue that we have free will because they came into place, they actualized. And so every slice of time where Clinton Wilcox exists, Clinton Wilcox in that slice of time is making a decision. But like I argued in the movie, all of those decisions are made simultaneously. But because they came into existence, they actualized. Those decisions were formed at the moment of actualization.
I don't know. I mean, it sounds a little funny to me to say that I'm making all of the decisions simultaneously, because that's not really how I experience my choices. Because it doesn't make sense to me to say I'm making all my choices simultaneously when there were choices I made yesterday and there were choices I will make tomorrow that I haven't made yet.
Well, the Clinton Wilcox in this slice of time hasn't made them, but the Clinton Wilcox in those slices of time has. I mean, every moment that you make a choice, you're making a choice in that moment, even under a theory of time, where moments actualize in the present and then in the past. But, it wouldn't be significantly different if all of those moments just actually, because the moments are actually, they're coming into being. Mm-hmm. So, you're just quibbling between the difference between them coming into being gradually over a period of time, or them coming into being simultaneously. Either way, it would look the same. The only way in which B theory of time problems is if time never comes into being. Those moments never actualize. They're just always.
Yeah. I don't know.
This is one of those questions for me that, from a theology standpoint instead of a philosophy standpoint, I think we have to recognize that, there are at least multiple senses of time that we don't quite know about. So, for instance, we have our humanity timeline, which we know everything we can know about, in terms of, started at the Big Bang with time, space, and matter being created simultaneously. And we see kind of, the history of our timeline play out. But given that angels are also created beings, then there is, in some sense, another sense of time that I don't think we understand quite how that interacts with our timeline. So, if you will, there's another timeline of sorts that is playing out. And then, of course, you have God, who is the creator of all, who would be outside of both of these timelines, for lack of a better word. Now, I haven't fleshed this out anymore and compared quite how it relates to A and B theory of time, but I think it does throw a little bit of a theological wrench in there, that we don't have just one timeline to deal with. We have this secondary, not alternate, but a higher timeline of sorts.
I mean, one of the themes of the movie was giving value to the girl's life, despite the fact that she had this terminal disease, but her life had value because every moment of that life was, actualized and eternal in a sense, at least in the sense that her mother could, be aware of each moment of those times, regardless of where she was on the timeline. So they were fixed in her mind, essentially.
Yeah. There was a quote, actually, at the very beginning of the movie, which parallels. It's more of the end of the movie, but memory is not what I thought it was, because we are still bound by time. It was one of those first quotes to kick off the movie, which was interesting. And I think it leads to, again, it goes back to this overall thing we're talking about in terms of the transcendence and kind of meta narrative of this movie is, and I think this is how it gets to, I never really kind of got to how it answers the problem of suffering. But I think its answer to that is that when you step beyond your view of time, so our current view of time, of past, present, and future, which we don't know, to step back from that into another timeline, or to step outside of it in the way that God's nature does, then you're looking at things with a different perspective. While in the moment, a choice to live through a horrible disease or have a child live through a horrible disease seems awful in the moment, there is nothing you could say to a parent in that situation that could reconcile the horrible pain and suffering they're going through. But when you step outside of what we are bound by, which is time, and step beyond that boundary in some way, shape, or form, you get a view and a perspective that's not based on this moment or this incident. It's based on lives completed and lived, and all the moments of your life put together in a way that I think we have to consider that while we can't know what that perspective is like, I think we have to consider that it's possible. It is very possible that there is enough meaning and purpose behind the suffering we see within the universe that eventually we will have a perspective where we wouldn't have altered the course of actions that we took in this life. At least, I certainly hope that's the case. There may be people who very well wish they had altered their courses in this life. But I think from a gospel perspective, eventually we'll be able to see that, we wouldn't have changed the way God did it in terms of all that we've experienced as a humanity.
Yeah, there's the sense that every conscious moment exists within memory because, even as I speak these words, the only way we're aware of the words I'm speaking is in our memory after they've already been spoken. And so long as you're remembering a thing, it's not dead because it exists within your memory. And so this idea to be conscious of all moments simultaneously, makes all of those moments simultaneous. It makes them actual until the memory dies. And there's this idea, the Egyptian pharaohs said that you're not dead as long as your name is remembered. And that's why they built these giant monuments, that they would always be remembered, and therefore they would always live on in memory. Now, if you take Heisenberg and Schrodinger and kind of smash them together, you've got this concept that a thing that happens doesn't really happen until it's observed, and so that would be ridiculous on the face of it, unless you posit a being which can observe all, obviously, in which case that works.
All right, that's a good point.
Not apologetic, but I can't focus it off of the larger philosophies here for some reason.
No, and I think it does tie back in, because I think a movie like this is so geared towards what it causes you to think and the thought processes that come from it. That's what makes this film in particular, for me, a beautiful piece of art, is that it does cause thought about these things. I mean, not to mention the story itself, just tugs at my heartstrings when I watch it. But these are elements that are important for thinking about, and I think that they really help shape, our thought processes and our philosophy in life.
Yeah, movies have that effect. Yeah, one thing I appreciated about this movie was like in Independence Day, you had these giant ships that like came down and hovered over cities, and there was this sort of awesome feeling that came with that. Awesome in the sense of dread, because
Hmm.
obviously there's this thing that's now over the city and dwarfing it, and it was really cool, and it had the intended effect. With these, you have this giant object that just comes down and starts hovering over the earth, and it's still got that awesome feeling because it's so huge, but there's a lot more accessibility to it because it's so close you know and so that could go either way. I mean, it didn't look quite as militant as the giant saucers with all the things sticking off of them, because it was just one continuous smooth object. But then again, a giant object hovering over the earth just does have that sense of dread. But I mean, that was a perfect combination because you had the dread and the mystery of something alien, but you had the accessibility of it being close enough to touch.
Yeah, true. And I think, again, that plays on probably this whole idea of transcendence and, something that's outside of our perspective, nearly touching down into life. Because, like you said, it's close, but it's like still just hovering right above the earth. So it's something else just about right there,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But yeah, it definitely created and I don't know, I wouldn't say this one had as much dread. Probably initially watching it. Granted, I was spoiled from the story to go in, so it didn't have so much of that for me, but it did kind of create this awe feeling, if you will.
Yeah, awe was definitely there, but if I walked around the corner and I saw that thing, there would be a sense of dread. You know,
Yeah, that's true. I'd freak out.
the unknown is always a little scary.
Hmm. So I want to make sure we touched on everything you guys kind of wanted to touch on going through this film as well. Going back to the math side for just a second, I thought it was interesting too. They made such an interesting point of the non-zero sum game from game theory. So essentially, to boil it down in a nutshell, um, it's in game theory a situation where one decision maker's gain or loss does not necessarily result in the other decision maker's gain or loss. In other words, where the winnings and losings of all players do not add up to zero, and everyone can gain, i.e., a win-win, if you will.
Caleb, are you familiar with those games that they play in these sort of psychological experiments where you have and they have a certain amount of money and you're not aware of the other
Mm-hmm.
party's money, and like you have this option of working together cooperatively or punishing the other person by cheating them, which may hurt yourself. And so the question is, are you going to be trusting enough of the other person to cooperate, which has the possibility of hurting yourself? Or are you going to be untrusting or perhaps vengeful and just the most, even if it hurts you?
Yeah, I'm familiar. We did a few experiments with that back in college.
Yeah, so that reminds me of what you're saying.
Yeah, and when they take it kind of a step further, and it kind of relates exactly to this, is they essentially take that, and if have you ever heard of SimSoc?
Yeah.
It's simulated society game essentially, but it takes that and it takes multiple levels of it in different ways. So you throw in politics and um, travel issues and food issues in, and you essentially create a simulated society within like a entire floor of a psych department or whatever. And only certain people can communicate. And essentially you end up with this same kind of scenario where you can either take from other groups or you can give to other groups. And, you know, you don't even have a set goal, but do you prosper as a group, or do you share this with others? It's kind of the same idea, but on a much larger kind of scale, and relates to kind of the same way we do these things in society in some ways. But yeah, so a non-zero sum game would be one kind of like that, except, you know, where the gain or loss does not necessarily equal out to zero. So
And if you want to hear about a zero-sum game, watch the classic science fiction movie War Games.
Yep. It's been a long time since I've seen that one.
I have not seen that one.
Yes, it's been a very long time since I've seen that one as well. I only remember that.
Oh, you cut out a little bit there.
I said I only remember the one thing about it.
Fair enough. So last thing I had to say, and then I'll toss it back to you guys for any final thoughts or anything else you want to bring up. But there was one scripture that came to mind while I was watching this movie. And it was 1 Corinthians 13:12. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I have been fully known. And this scripture just came back to me a couple of times while watching the movie. I mean, you've got the parallel with the kind of cloudy glass area. And, you know, in one of the final scenes of the movie, she's on the other side of this face to face with these heptapods. And it's a much different kind of experience. They're much larger than she knew they were. And in this moment, it's this realization that she knows what's going to happen. She finally has this realization that all these flashbacks are the future and everything. So, and again, this ties into some of the elements I mentioned earlier, that I feel this outside perspective that we will eventually have on this timeline that we live within. But you know, this scripture it just stood out to me as I thought it connected in a number of ways with the movie. I don't think any of the directors or actors intended this to probably be the case. But again, I think art imitates life in many ways. And, you know, that's certainly something we see here.
Yeah, we're going to have to come up with some kind of... Wait, did you already come up with a title for our movie things, Kel? Oh, yeah, it was...
yeah, Mentionables Apologetic Theater.
Mystery Science Theater 3000.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah, you know, I mean, I did not have the history of seeing this movie going in. I was watching it for the very first time. And at the time, I was just watching it to enjoy it. I wasn't really trying to pick the food. That's something that I could do with you guys. And I typically am able to do that much better if I'm talking to someone about it. So I don't have anything apologetically to bring, although it's a very solid philosophical movie. And, you know, I mean, you could bring these questions around to time and the nature of time and how that relates to God's existence, but that's less apologetic and more just, you know, theological or philosophical.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add. I thought Arrival was just a fabulous science fiction movie, and actually I wasn't that crazy about it the first time I saw it. It wasn't until I started really thinking about it and reflecting on it that I started to really appreciate it more and more. And now I would place it in one of my top 10, if not my top 5 science fiction films. So yeah, you know, I think there's a lot of good philosophical discussion in there. And, you know, I think general philosophy could relate to apologetics, but specifically, you know, for thinking of apologetics as, you know, arguments for God's existence, then, you know, it might be a little bit more difficult to see how how this relates apologetically. But I just think the movie presents a lot of really good food for thought.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
definitely.
any time you can take a philosophical idea or even pull in scripture to a movie, if it's something that movies have a profound impact on people many times, and this is one of those movies that I think can have a profound impact. So I think when you can pull in scripture or philosophy into that kind of discussion when talking about somebody with a film like this, it can open up bridges that might not have been otherwise opened.
Mm. Yeah, and taking a philosophical topic and presenting it in a way that's interesting too, that keeps your attention, is really something to behold. I just recently saw Blade Runner for the first time, and I know that movie is beloved by a lot of people, but I just did not see what other people see in Blade Runner.
I'm right there with you.
It's a little
Yeah.
slow.
Yeah, I mean, Arrival was slow, but there's something about Arrival that really kept your attention and kept the suspense building, whereas Blade Runner was really more dull than interesting. And then, I might get hate mail from saying that, but yeah, it's just something about Arrival that because I can appreciate a slow movie, especially if it's one that's causing you to think, and Blade Runner wanted you to think about the themes in the movie, but it was just a different experience overall than seeing Arrival.
Clinton, it's so cute that you think we get mail.
Well, I mean, I'm talking about like on Facebook. Like I know people, if they catch this broadcast, they'll get upset that
I mean, we have
did.
live watchers right now, so they can go ahead and throw their hate mail in the chat,
There you go.
for you trashing Blade Runner. So,
Right.
that's fine. Or
So,
agree.
So just to be clear, I wasn't specifically trashing Blade Runner. I'm just saying I didn't see in it what a lot of other people see, and I kind of didn't think it was a very interesting movie like Arrival was. And Arrival was pretty slow in parts and had very little action in it. The military kind of got up in arms at one point, but yeah, no real action in Arrival. But the subject matter was just interesting. And the subject matter of Blade Runner is interesting too. So I really don't know why I liked Arrival but didn't like Blade Runner. It might be something I have to think about.
I don't know, the pacing or something with Blade Runner was just off
Yeah.
for me, and it never had a hook. Like, I watched the movie the whole way through, but there was no point in the movie I went, you know what? I'm really hooked into these characters, or I buy into the plot, or I buy into just thinking about this movie. There was no hook for me.
Right.
Yeah, maybe it didn't age.
Maybe, yeah.
Well,
the sequel didn't do all that hot, I don't think.
It had a sequel?
Yeah, like 2 years ago.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
I've been told
was that like Blade Stroller?
No, it's like Blade Runner 2046 or something like that. And I've actually been told I should watch the sequel because it'll actually, make the first one more, I don't know, more appealing or something like that. It's like it'll add, I guess, like layers of depth to the first one if I watch the sequel. So
do you think Decker was a robot or no?
I think that was probably Ridley Scott's intention, but the movie really didn't make much of that whole debate. So I kind of lean toward maybe, but the movie wasn't very clear about it. So if the movie's not clear, I don't really like to speculate about it.
So I've heard that movie is in the same universe as the Aliens movies.
Really?
Which explains, you know how the robots in the Aliens movies are more like these biological synthoid type things.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, you've got what's going on in Earth and Blade Runner, but you've also got what's out in space looking for aliens and so forth. So, but I've heard that.
Yeah. Did Ridley Scott? He did the first Alien, didn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe it's a possibility.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting theory.
Yeah.
Well, we're probably at the point where we should wrap it up.
Yeah, since we've moved on to a different movie entirely.
Yeah, which I'm totally willing to have that, these conversations. But man, I'm like over here yawning because I have to get up early tomorrow because I'm traveling.
Oh yeah. So
yeah.
Well,
right.
we don't want to keep you up too late. Have safe travel, sir. I will go ahead and run our outro. Thanks for joining us. We'll turn off our spoiler banner now. No need to think we're done with spoilers for tonight.
You're not spoiling anything with the outro?
I hope not. So any pitches before we leave? So what else should the current viewers go and check out if they enjoyed tonight's show?
Well, definitely check out the movie Arrival if you haven't seen it. Great movie. Actually, any of the movies we mentioned here today are worth seeing, probably.
And even if you listen to the show, there's a lot of Arrival we didn't spoil, so there's still things left to see
right
in that movie.
Yeah, I would agree with that. How about you, Clinton? Where can they find more stuff from you?
Well, I have another podcast with my co-host Nathan Apodaca. We don't exactly upload very regularly, so it's kind of a coin toss of when our next one will be. But it's called Pro-Life Thinking. You can find it on iTunes. You can also find it on blogtalkradio.com. It's blogtalkradio.com/prolifethinking. And you can also find me on various blogs. I have written articles for the Secular Pro-Life blog, and I also write for the Life Training Institute blog. And, you can find me on Facebook and Twitter. Just search for my name.
Yep. And the Mentionables are available on Facebook and Twitter as well.
Mm-hmm.
Our Facebook feed's probably a little more frequently updated than our Twitter feed. But, yeah. And then you can follow all of the Mentionables if you like any of us.
Are you actively pitching any of your switching sides?
Well, yeah, my updates on that have picked up a great deal and probably will be accelerating in the near future. There's a number of things coming up as I near the end of the research, and we're going to hope to have a discussion on the podcast / YouTube feed on that once I finalize the interesting things to talk about there. I even toyed with the idea of doing a separate podcast just on that subject. But at any rate, we can get some of that done here on this podcast as I go over the finals of my research. So yeah, I would follow the Twitter feed is @side switching, and the Facebook page is Switching Sides. We have a group and we have a page. I share all the same things on both of them. Yeah, and if you follow, keep your eye out because a lot of cool things coming up on that.
Excellent. Very cool. So, and in addition to being over here with you guys, I also do a broadcast called Question Christianity, where we dive in and have discussions on topics. We try and take some academic level stuff and bring it down to just a general conversation. So check that out on YouTube and Facebook. But again,
yeah, I am not good at that.
Well, again, if you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. We would love to have you back here, hitting us up in chat or commenting when we're doing one of these live shows. Again, we love interaction. So thank you for joining us tonight. We enjoyed being here, and I'm gonna roll our outro, guys.
All right.